So you've got an office at home, Samir, right?
Well, this is like a simple office. Yes, a table and a chair and a working station. That's it.
No, and you've got a white background.
Yeah, it's at the wall. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Okay. I just see, how do I see everyone? Yeah, got it. I'm set. Got a nice picture. Hi, Girish. Hey, how are you? We've got 21 participants. Let's see.
Meanwhile, Shweta, you can move on to, we can maybe tell people who are streaming in, we can tell them about the forthcoming speakers as well.
So I have Akhil Gupta. Akhil, hi. Thank you for joining. Akhil from Blackstone now with Harvard, and he always comes in. Thank you, Akhil. Really grateful. Babita, hi. Girish, hi. These are all the guys. Sanjay, hi, Sanjay. Thank you. Sanjay he's the CEO for Mahindra Smart City, and he's always there. Srini, hi, Srini. Swati is there, and Sunil Bhardwaj, hi. Tilga, hi, all of you. Thanks for joining us.
My mother is one regular attendee. She's always there. She's also.
Oh, yeah, thank you very, very much. So Swati Surve is your mom. Good evening, ma'am. Great to have you. And there's a lot of people joining us.
Yeah, Shweta, maybe we can tell them about the forthcoming sessions as well.
Yes. While we wait for the viewers to join in, Shweta, can you switch over to who our next 4 speakers are? So no one has seen that. Shweta, just give me a second, because by doing this, you change the settings of my screen completely. Let me fix the setting of my screen. Okay. So yeah, now I can see everyone. Thanks, Shweta. This is a quick and a peek preview of our next 4 speakers. You see, starting from the extreme left, next week we will have Sanjay Mehta. He's the joint CEO of Miram, which is a leading digital marketing agency. You should listen to him talk about how to get the best bang from your marketing bucks. And by the way, and why spending on Facebook ads alone is not the best way to build your brand. He calls it spot war. By the way, he's also the man who's behind the mutual funds Achhe Hain campaign, which is a very successful campaign. Listen to him, okay? Then we have a very renowned thought leader and author of many leadership books on our show, Professor Stephen Sonsino from the London Business School. He will talk about Leadership 3.0, and he talks about it for the first time. That's a book that he's penning, or he's nearly penned. And so that's the first time when he talks on our show. And some of you know Stephen well. Stephen also teaches at the ISB and coaches a number of CEOs both in India as well as globally. Then after that, we have Siddharth Mittal, who's the CEO of Biocon. He will delve more into the future of healthcare and how Biocon is helping in the fight with COVID. And finally, we have 2 ladies on our show. Well, this was pointed out to us by Stephen Sonsino. You should have some ladies too. And the first time for us, Babita Sinha and Soumya Tiwari, they are joint CEOs of Your Green Canvas. And both have been at the forefront of driving sustainable living. They've also been helping Mother Nature and the businesses that they deal with become more anti-fragile. Some very interesting conversations, a must watch for how big dreams can garner global support. You don't need to be really very large, but large dreams are enough to garner. So do join us for all of this, and we will keep you posted. And Sangram, with this, over to you. We have a couple of minutes, but I think we can begin some of the proceedings.
We can tell them about some of the other developments. I think it's still 6:02. Maybe we can wait for a couple of minutes. So for those of you who've just streamed in, we're doing quite a few things. As a matter of fact, I'll also announce about that later, but a second blog, COVID Tales, has come up. For those of you who are listening in for the first time, COVID Tales is our effort to basically tap into peer-to-peer inspiration, where we look at micro stories of how people are coping with the entire COVID crisis. What we are attempting to do is kind of, through experiences, unearth a COVID response playbook, where through the experiences of people, we are tapping into how are people actually responding in various ways to COVID. This particular blog, we bumped into 3 artists who have used COVID as an inspiration and have created and enhanced their art. We had a movie script being born out of the COVID experiences with one of the stories. The other stories where a marketing director from Singapore actually produced a movie during COVID only on a Zoom screen. You know, so you had Zoom screens, actually a full-fledged movie being produced. And then there is a BBC award-winning photographer who did something and captured all of Bombay on drones during the lockdown. So all of these are captured, and I think every week we attempt to reach out to people and figure out what they did during COVID. Right from enhancing, innovating their businesses to winning over personal battles and doing fantastic stuff. So every week, I think we'll be featuring some of those. I think the second one goes live on Monday. You can also check on that. And I think it's about 6:04. Alok, should we start?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. So a big hello and welcome to Guts, Glory and Story, the 4th episode of Guts, Glory and Story, where every week we listen into people who are at the helm of their domains. Just last week, we had a scintillating session with Kamal Singh. And we actually saw how digital first consumer brands were actually innovating and finding very smart COVID niches. And here we are, even the post session blog found a lot of traction. We had a lot of views on that. Our YouTube channel got a lot of views, maximum number of views for Kaval session. So it was indeed a fantastic session. And here we moved on to the next one. I've already told you about COVID Tales, so I will not repeat myself over there. But today's session is where we take the conversation further. We here are discussing about the nuts and bolts problem that MSMEs have, whether it's cash flows, whether it's finances, whether it's innovating in the times of COVID, or whether it's even tackling, dodgy issues like layoffs. Because we actually are the right man for the job. We have a person from Wadhwani Foundation, Samir Sathe, the EVP of Wadhwani Foundation. And Wadhwani Foundation is in the business of funding and mentoring entrepreneurs. So no better person to tell us about that. And lastly, for those of us who don't know us, brief introduction, one-line introduction about us. My name is Sangram Surve. I'm the CEO and MD of the Think Why Not Group, basically an ad man, filmmaker, and a content evangelist. And with me is my co-host, my pal, Alok Sinha, serial CEO, entrepreneur, investor, and now author. His book, Achieving Successful Business Outcomes, is out in the market, published by Taylor and Francis. And now to make way for the man of the hour, Samir Sathe, I will hand it over to Alok to give a formal introduction. Stage is all yours, Alok.
Thank you, Sangram. And Samir, welcome to the show. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, once again, and please welcome Samir Sathe, who's the EVP of Wadhwani Foundation, to Guts, Glory and Story. Samir spearheads the MSME program at Wadhwani and has 2 programs. One is a grant program called Sahayata, as well as another, which is a mentoring program, which is Advantage SME. And we will talk about the steps taken by the foundation for the Indian industry, especially for the entrepreneurs and the MSMEs, to blunt the negative impact of COVID. Incidentally, he is himself a trained classical singer, a professional cricketer, and a painter. Ladies and gentlemen, presenting our power speaker for today, speaking on the future of MSMEs and startups in India, Samir Sathe. Samir, welcome again. And my first question to you, I think a lot of people did ask, so many of the people who are on our show at the moment understand what Wadhwani Foundation is. I was part of Wadhwani's at one point in time at Symphony. But a lot of them have asked about Wadhwani. So tell us more about Wadhwani and your programs that I referenced.
Sure.
Samir.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me here, Sangram and Alok. It's my pleasure, and it's fantastic to really look at the initiative that you're having in terms of particularly this show. I'm glad to be here and happy to share my thoughts on what the subject of today's show is all about. So Wadhwani Foundation really is a global philanthropy founded by Dr. Ramesh Wadhwani, who has been a serial entrepreneur living in the States for the last 40 years, a brilliant genius guy, and has built 42 businesses, of which about 40 have been successful. So incredible track record. But I think, as you know, that there are many billionaires and millionaires, but few have a desire to share their wealth with those who need that, right? So I think he is one of those few billionaires who has pledged 80% of his wealth. He has pledged about $1.5 billion also to the whole mission of job creation and job preservation, which is one of the most complex problems in the world, as you are aware, whether it is emerging economies or also in the developed world as well. So that's what Foundation's mission is to really ensure that the emerging economies especially are in a state wherein they protect and create high value jobs. What do we mean by high value? Is basically the jobs that are going to be ensuring that everyone who earns their daily wages and salaries enough to feed themselves as well as their families and their near dear ones. So as long as we are able to create the jobs, that's the mission. So it has 5 buckets. The first is really the MSME, SME program, which is called Advantage program, which is what I lead in India and give a global mentoring support. That focuses on SMEs for a simple reason that we all know that SMEs contribute anywhere between 25% to 50% to the GDP of any emerging economies, and in many cases the developed economies as well, and contribute to a substantial amount of employment, anywhere between 25% to even 99% of the employment generated in any country. So it's a significantly important initiative. It's a flagship initiative. The second bucket is really Venture Fast Track, which focuses on startups. The third is really what we call as NEN, which is National Entrepreneurship Network, that focuses on helping kids to become better entrepreneurs. So while on one hand we have supply of talent, obviously what India needs is really job creating engines, and we need to have enough jobs to be able to absorb that talent, right? So there is a big mismatch. So ability to create entrepreneurs is also very important in addition to ability to create jobs in the entrepreneurs and enterprises. So that's the program. We have Catalyst, which is a grant giving program to spot the innovative sort of technologies and innovative businesses. And finally, we have Wadhwani Opportunity, which is focused on skilling people, because that's another big problem today in India as well as globally. So that's what Wadhwani Foundation Advantage program is all about. And in my role, what I really focus on is really to ensure that we make the entire MSME ecosystem really competitive, to accelerate their growth economically, so that they're in a position to hire people, protect people, and so on and so forth. So that's what all Advantage program is all about. Sahayata program is a baby brand of Advantage, which is like what you mentioned. The whole thought came up when the COVID hit us, and in March, we all thought that it's, rather than creation, we should also think about having Sahayata, the help to a lot of the SMEs so that they can protect their employees in terms of their jobs, right? Because many are bleeding. It's a bloodbath out there. So many face the existential crisis. In my estimate, and based on the calculations that we have done, anywhere between 25 to 30% might actually face the risk of extinction. And that's a magnitude which is unprecedented. So we are also looking at protecting jobs. The Sahayata program is all about ensuring that we help them in these tough times, and also give funds for those who commit themselves to transformations and growth. So that's what we typically do as far as this program is concerned.
So I think my question, Samir, is very connected to, it's an extension of the same discussion. So basically, I think most MSMEs are going through the same problems. It's cash, it's solvency, growth is much later. It's first survive and then thrive. Everyone's also keen to know that, everyone knows that the short term is going to be very difficult, right? But what is the definition of the short term? How long is it going to last?
Sure.
Nobody has an answer to that. People are losing jobs, and you just mentioned about the Sahayata program. So typically for an entrepreneur, how does he tackle this aspect of layoffs? Okay. And how can one expect help from the Sahayata Foundation and the Wadhwani Foundation in general? So two questions. One is, the cash and the solvency issues which MSMEs are going through.
Sure.
And second is layoffs. And the third part is how can Wadhwani help?
Sure. So let me address the first part. Cash and solvency situation is there, we all know, and government has announced a lot of sort of debt relief for the SMEs. But the real issue is much beyond that. The real issue is, according to us, in our estimates, we could run into the big issue of debt trap, because the money which is going in is not necessarily going into investment capacity. It's going into ensuring that they stay afloat. Now, therein lies the risk. So while entrepreneurs are facing cash problems, the real need is to shore up the domestic demand to ensure that the money is put into the right use. So while we solve their cash management problems and working capital management problems and ensuring that they streamline their operations to unlock the capital from the operations, the real issue is to actually look at growth and survival not differently. They are related issues. For the simple reason, the way we treat it as growth is survival. If you want to survive, you need to grow. It's not that you first survive and then grow. Frankly, growth actually allows you to survive. So it's like what Einstein said, right? You ride a bicycle. If you stop riding a bicycle, you lose balance and fall down, right? You have to keep riding. You have to go in front. And that's the only way to remain stable and balanced in whatever you do. So I think what we are trying to do is to ensure that we help these entrepreneurs to manage that cash problem by giving them learning, tools, knowledge. And this is a unique program simply because it's a blend of learning and consulting. It's just not consulting, it's just not only learning. And while we do that, we enable them to solve that problem. But going beyond that, we help them to really look at managing the demand part of it. That's a more sustainable solution. The second part, which is the layoffs, is a significant issue. And in our estimates, basically the way we look at it is anywhere between 30 million to 40 million actually face the risk of losing jobs or be in the disguised employment, which is basically suboptimal because let's say if somebody is very talented and very skilled, they're not going to command the same consideration or remuneration or salary for what they deserve. Right? So it's suboptimal. So the value of that talent goes down. On the other hand, there are so many jobs which are going to be lost. And thirdly, there are going to be jobs which require a lot of reskilling and unskilling. It's very important. And the reason I mentioned unskilling is very important because, and this I wrote in one of my Financial Express articles also, is that it's very important for MSMEs to understand the difference between unskilling, reskilling, learning, unlearning, and upskilling. You need to go through this series of sort of cycles. And if you don't do that to your labor or to your working class or to your knowledge professionals, then you definitely run the risk of layoffs. So the way SMEs are managing that and the way we are helping them manage that is to actually help them, first of all, to look at how can you manage in the short term. And that's where basically segmenting employees into, who are the employees who are really either stars or performers or have potential. But also more importantly, who are the people who extend and go beyond their roles? Because remember, in adversity, there are only two kinds of things that happen. Either people run away or people actually go beyond their traditional roles and start making themselves solid. Because if the system is not solid, you can't look at a particular hope to actually stay in that system. So it's a collective thing, right? And in systems thinking, all components have to work together. So employees really go beyond their traditional roles, learn better, skill themselves better, and therefore stay in the jobs. And that's what we are telling the entrepreneurs also. And that can be done, mind you, not necessarily, it is not a long-term problem. It can be done in a very short term as well. Mm-hmm. So I think because what happens, there is this whole concept of learning anxiety and survival anxiety, right? So today, SMEs are facing survival anxiety. And the literature suggests that if you are facing survival anxiety, you are most likely to learn fast because there is no other option, right? Either you go out of business or you stay in the business. So therefore, using these principles, we are basically asking the entrepreneurs to ensure that they focus on those employees whom they believe are good for their future. And in fact, a very different lens that we are also taking, although our mission is job creation, is also to look at it as an opportunity to basically ensure that we basically declutter the whole employment base that you have. In many cases, there are inefficiencies. In many cases, there are wrong employees. In many cases, there are misfit employees. And this is one of the best times to do that. So it's a churn, right? It's a churn. So these are the different ways in we are asking employees and also the SMEs to manage the whole issue of layoffs.
So I think what you rightly pointed out is even in our organization, we are also an MSME at the end of the day, but even in our organization, we found exactly what you're saying is that a lot of the people who were considered to be unfit for that job, we toyed around, placed them into different roles, and almost all of them thrived and did well, you know.
Exactly.
So, but what I hear you saying is that some pain is inevitable. Some people will have to let go. In such a case, do you also counsel and do you also guide people in terms of how they should be reskilling? How do you?
Yes, and that's a good question. So it has three sort of three dimensions. The one dimension is at the industry level or the cluster level. The other dimension is at the firm level or the unit level. The third dimension is at the individual level, right? So what we typically do is that when we look at the situation and when these firms are facing these kinds of problems, we deal with that problem looking at these three levels and say, hey, are you in an industry which is basically getting disrupted? If that's the case, then you are basically facing a systemic change. You are facing a structural change, right? Then the way to deal with that problem with the employee base is very different. You need to deal with it by ensuring that whatever you do a group think as opposed to an individual think. What that means is that you are able to add value to these employees and entrepreneurs by taking all the group in one shot and figuring out what is it that they collectively they need to do to actually help the company or to help that industry in totality. So therefore we have very interestingly what we call peer learning sessions. And peer learning sessions are not limited to the firm or unit level. They're limited, they basically extend and go beyond. They go beyond the particular firm level. So if people talk to each other, learn from each other, there is a greater chance that you will basically figure out a solution to protect the industry that you're in. So if you're facing a disruptive change at the industry level, you can do some of these things at the industry or cluster level. The second at the firm and unit level is a clear idea about whether you're going to stay competitive or not. Are you going to really collaborate? Are you going to compete? And in hard times, it's very interesting. We saw a mixed picture. In certain industries, basically the bad tendencies are surfacing. So the people are fighting tooth nail and then they're trying to hoard the resources, not share the resources because resources are shrinking, right? On the other hand, there are certain situations wherein people are joining hands, they're helping each other. So both tendencies might surface. And from our point of view, we are looking at these examples very interestingly in different industries they pan out. So at the firm level, if one is dealing with that issue, one needs to really look at how to compete or to collaborate. The last level, which is at the individual level, is really very core of that individual as a talent. So, and there you basically frame it based on whether there is a need for what his talent is all about, whether there is an aptitude or inclination, and finally, at the skill level, whether that individual is good enough, right? And when we combine these three lenses, one is able to look at skilling in a different fashion. So I think whether you upskill or reskill alive and thriving and command your salaries or not, that's the question that we deal with when we are dealing with the individual level. And that's a part of the Sahayata program because one needs to take a 360-degree view of that enterprise. It's just not about an entrepreneur. It's also about the entire unit. And I think that's very, very important for us to consider.
Brilliant. So that brings you to my last question before I think I hand it over to Alok. And which is, as you rightly said, crisis is the right time to think anew, right? It was said, I read somewhere that the World War began on horseback and ended in the nuclear war. That entire era was packed with so much of innovation. Right?
Yeah.
Now, this time is right for innovation. How does Wadhwani Foundation handhold MSMEs in terms of spurring innovation within the organization? Like you said, growth is also important. So simultaneously, when you're managing cash flows, how does another part of the organization focus on spurring innovation and handling the whole growth issue?
So one of the things that we kind of encourage the SMEs to practice is really a bifocal vision because, when the resources are thin, you tend to utilize all the resources to sort the immediate problems on hand, obviously, because that's the way the mind is. In an anxious mind, always thinks of solving an immediate problem. A calm mind always thinks of solving that problem, but also look at preparing himself or herself in the long term. So we do it in two ways. One is to basically look at ensuring that when we think of innovation, we think of in two dimensions. One is what I call capitalist innovation, and the other is socialist innovation. So basically what that means is you will notice that most of the nature of innovations that has happened is largely capitalist, which means the people who fund that innovation or invest in that innovation or do that innovation is mainly to benefit themselves. Obviously not to benefit the competition and so on and so forth, because this is a business world. Also, however, in certain situations, in crisis situations, there have been very few weak signals of people innovating for the entire ecosystem. So although it's their IP, their investment, their funding, their money, their wallet, their time, the benefit is accrued to the entire ecosystem, including their competitors, right? And that is beginning to happen even in small companies. The normal thinking is that this is usually the subject of the large organizations who have large wallet sizes, but actually not. There are interesting examples which are coming up in our observations that people are actually thinking about their ecosystem and doing social innovations to be able to do that. So if one adopts a bifocal vision, the same rupee that you have, certain paisas can be spent on solving the immediate problem, certain paisas can be set aside to do that innovation. And it's a more habit forming thing right now. It's not about really telling oh, only black is right, only white is right. It's not that. It's about looking at that situation and then advising that SME as to, in their situations, how much of their resources should go into short term and how much of their in long term, one of them being innovation.
And this is a very interesting thing which you spoke about, because in my book, I have called this as attitudinal economics. So, you see a lot, and by the way, even in India, a lot of the startups do that. So they've created software and they've thrown it open to general public. So even Netflix, they created the Chaos Monkey and then threw it out to people. Use it for testing your networks, right? And the other part which you speak about, the innovation which is socialist innovation, I think I call it the generative innovation. So today everyone thinks that it needs to be testosterone driven, disruptive innovation. Can't only be disruptive. Internet, it added value to everyone. It wasn't disruptive, right? It was generative. It just added. But I do remember something which you once told me, very interesting comment, 2 comments. And I know you played with Sachin and you played with him under 15. So you said 2 comments, and I'll speak both of them, and you, in your words, explain how do you see how SMEs should be and how the mentor should be. So, and those 2 were, you said the first one you told me was, brittle bones have no place in real life. Now that's a very strong statement. You're trying to say something. And the second one you told was, the best trauma center does not guarantee critical patients to come out alive. It is not the trauma center, it's something more than trauma center. And help us conceptualize what the role should be that we are all playing.
Yeah, and that's a very good question, Alok. So let me just sort of attempt to put it in the frame and context that we are talking about. Firstly, I think when I made that comment and I was fortunate to play with Sachin at the under 15 level for Mumbai, one of the first things that I learned is that you need to face the practical realities, and if you are weak-minded, your ability to learn goes down. Your ability to learn goes down. Actually, you're weakening yourself and not going to proceed fast. Actually, that's a very big connection. And when I learned that in cricket, actually team sport, and then you know how it is on the field, everybody wants to win. And when you put that perspective, or in the context of MSMEs and in the context of really the advisor and the SME, we always, as sort of evangelist of this whole asking for help, which is notion, which entrepreneurs, a lot of the entrepreneurs in India, especially MSMEs, they either suffer from 2 biases. One bias is obviously they know it all, and then therefore they have a confirmation bias. They will always look for information that conforms with whatever they know, and that kind of limits their potential to sort of learn. But asking for help is a notion wherein is also being humble to be able to understand that there are other perspectives to be able to do that. Now, why is that related to this whole comment of brittle bones and the toughness? Is very simply what I have at least observed is that actually one learns better and one becomes tougher as basically one is able to get different perspectives from different sides, right? And typically in a team sport like cricket, it is very interdependent. If you are a good bowler and you bowl to a batsman and batsman hits the ball, and it's a catch and the fielder drops the catch, you can't do anything, right? You can't do anything. Ball might be good and then the catch is dropped. So it's very interdependent. So you have got to be interdependent, and that notion is very important for entrepreneur to understand. It's not only him or her that's going to build an empire and to realize ambition. There are many other people who are going to help them out. And those are the people who actually become tougher in the business. Why? Because they know that their success lies in the success of their putting together all these teams together. And I found a very high correlation between their having the tougher bones than the brittle bones, basically. So I think that's one. Relating to the second comment, the trauma center, I remember, I mean, we discussed that recently. And it was mainly because in one of the articles I mentioned that the winners that I've observed in MSMEs are those who build trauma capabilities before the crisis hits them, not after, right? However, it's just like a trauma center. When patients come in, you need much more than a trauma surgeon. And what is that much more is basically ability, at least we have observed in our experience, is that the entrepreneur at the end of the day treats his business like his baby, right? It's very emotionally attached to the business. Trauma center, the surgeons need to make clinical decisions about whether to cut that organ or not, and they need to make that decision very fast. The patient is going to die, right? But I think that very importantly, I've noticed that in good trauma centers, and there is a lot of medical literature available here, is that the patient's intense desire or their emotional strength actually goes a long way in ensuring that the patients come out of the trauma centers better. It's not about medical skill. It's not about what's the kind of severity of the trauma that the patient is undergoing. The doctor's ability to understand the emotion of the patient is as important as the other things which are required to make the patient better. And this is exactly with the advisor and the client and the MSME, right? Ability of the advisor to understand the emotion of the entrepreneur is equally important to basically looking at how the problem is dealt with in a clinical manner. So you have got to have balance of both. So I think that was a context when I sort of mentioned that to you.
No, but that makes sense. I mean, if the patient himself has lost the will to survive, it's over. It is over.
Absolutely, and we assume it, right? But it's actually not assumed. It goes much beyond that, right? So we have got to configure and understand whether it is really happening or not.
One question that I like to ask you, and usually when we get into our chats, usually we begin with a very personal question. But I think you had so many variations that we thought we will do right at the end. So, Samir, I'm very much aware of your background. You had an extremely fortunate childhood, because your father was Pandit Samir Sathe, the famous Gwalior Gharana vocalist, classical vocalist. And he had some gurus to die for, right? D.V. Paluskar, everyone knows. Sharat Chandra Arolkar, everyone knows him. And you're yourself a trained classical vocalist. And Sangram and I, we were talking about the fact that people like Bhimsen Joshi were compatriots, and you've known them from close. And what we used to pay tickets to go and hear some of those concerts, you used to see that happening in your house. Now, how did your coming from such a passionate, music-oriented family help you with your professional choices? And those professional choices finally got you to something like Wadhwani, because you've done hardcore, as you said, capitalist profession, right? But now here you are, and you're doing something in the good of the people. How do you connect these two parts of your?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, so the way it has happened is that first of all, I've been extremely grateful and fortunate to have lived that childhood with my parents. Both of them, by the way, were musicians. My mother is still alive. My father passed away last year, unfortunately. But all his 87 years of life, he practiced music diligently. He was performing even 15 days before his death. And I think as a child, it has left an indelible stamp on me. And I'll tell you what's the relation of the music to what I do today. You know, as an artist, one has to, and that's what I've learned as a musician or as a student of music, I would say, is that you need to master the science, but beyond science, the technical brilliance, you know, there is an element of impromptu creativity that happens on stage when you're performing. The artist hasn't thought about reciting it earlier. It's very different from, let's say, an orchestra where all the notes are written and you play exactly to those notes. A classical vocalist in Hindustani classical vocalist trains himself or herself for many, many years, hones their talents. But on stage, it's spontaneous creativity, right? So you have a rhythmic cycle. You have got, your responses have to be like this. So your response system to the stimuli in the environment, actually music teaches you a lot, because it's in many ways, it's a combination of what I call deterministic and exploratory. Deterministic, why? Because you have a rhythmic cycle of, let's say teen tal, which is of 16 beats, right? You need to arrive at a sama or the final beat. So that's deterministic. But what you do in between is very exploratory, right? And when you go from the end point of one cycle to another starting point of that cycle, it's extremely dependent on the creative genius of that artist, right? And it has to seem nice, it has to be aesthetic, it has to be pleasing, yet it has to be technical, right? So it goes beyond, and that is very important skill for an entrepreneur. Ability to be adaptive, ability to respond to the stimuli, ability to figure out what can you do in the space which is left between two matras or two beats of music. This is what entrepreneur does all the time. They pivot, they change, they adapt, they respond to the stimuli faster. And which is why it is very closely related to evolutionary science, because it's the survival of the fittest. And therefore, if you look at that analogy, and then the music and therefore entrepreneurship is very closely related. You need to be creative, you need to master your basic stuff, but you need to be creative. So I think that's something that I find it extremely relevant to what I do today.
You took my next question, because my next question was, what we learn at B school is the deterministic part. Those are the rules as to how business should be done. But when you come down and become an entrepreneur, you're forced to improvise, because a lot of those rules change.
Exactly.
So there is an art side to that, to the whole entrepreneurship thing as well. Which brings me to, I think we're starting our audience questions, because I think we've kind of giving a chance for the audience. And I think audience, feel free to even start asking your questions. Don't wait only for the ones that we've already received. If you have questions in the Q&A column, you can keep on asking. We'll pick something from random. I would like to start off with a question from Subir. And it's very much related to what we were talking about. And his question is, what differentiates a MSME or an entrepreneur that has successfully tackled COVID from those who are not able or who are struggling with this whole COVID crisis?
Okay, very good question. I think, let me answer this in two parts. The first is really the question of preparation. I've noticed, if you look at a couple of things that the winners did well when the crisis hit them, was before the crisis hit them, and which was basically anticipating that some things could go wrong, anticipating that their assumptions that they always dealt with could be wrong. Those entrepreneurs who prepared that very well survived better in crisis, and they were able to sort of have better cushion. The second element, when the crisis hit them, I think the mindset of the entrepreneur is very important. I've noticed that the winners actually were able to treat that crisis as an opportunity very quickly. So one of the examples is that one of my SMEs, basically everyone wear masks these days, right? So, and there is a wiring inside some of the masks when you want to fit it on your nose and things like that. So this SME was in wire manufacturing, nothing to do with medical science, nothing to do with masks, but they pivoted, used that wiring element to that, took it to the next level. They actually grew it by 4 times. So they changed their, they basically looked at the opportunity which was there right in front of them. And then they changed it. Another example is somebody who actually, an SME who completely created a simulated virtual reality environment. They were in the travel business. And we asked them to develop those capabilities. Till then, they always assume that people are going to travel, people are going to obviously meet each other and things like that. But we basically help them build the digital capabilities, because people can have the same enjoyment. Okay, I might be wrong in saying same enjoyment, but similar enjoyment sitting at home with the virtual reality. And they have therefore been able to hedge those bits. The only difference in those guys was they were able to quickly respond to the crisis very well. So the mindset of the entrepreneur, if that of a growth mindset, I think those who haven't read that book of Carol Dweck, I will strongly encourage all of you to read Carol, because that book talks about this exact element of ability to train your mind to keep on responding to the crisis better and better. And those winners were those who, I mean, the entrepreneurs actually harbored that thought very well. They actually cultivated their ability to think about always opportunities, and nothing less. So that kind of actually it sets the tone for a lot of the actions that the entrepreneurs took. So we can talk endlessly about the strategies and tactical stuff, but really the heart of the issue is these two things basically, because the answer to that question might vary from industry to industry, but these are the two very important elements.
If I were to summarize in one line, it's about constantly being on the lookout for that silver lining, no matter how much the downside is. Absolutely.
Yes, and it's hard because entrepreneurs are lonely in any case, and in crisis situations they feel lonelier. And to get that motivation and to get that inspiration is not easy. But I think those winners who I have observed have been able to do that. That's the only difference.
I think one of the participants is asking, could you please repeat the name of the book? They are keen to.
Carol Dweck. It's The Growth Mindset. She's from the US. She's a psychologist, and I think she did lectures in Harvard, and she's I think from MIT also. She did some work, but brilliant book. I think you must read.
Could you spell out the name of the author? The Growth Mindset by
the Growth Mindset by Carol Carol Dweck, Dweck.
Okay, great. That answers.
Carol Dweck. Yeah.
Samir, it seems our viewers have clairvoyance. So although this is a pre-populated question, there is a question over here which says, and this is Suresh, who says, well, that is fine, what you said. But how do entrepreneurs disengage from crisis management and focus on innovation? How do they do it? Because if life is all about crisis management and trying to see what is the silver lining, how do they link these two?
And if we could substantiate also with an example, I think insights are coming to life when you're actually giving examples from your experience.
Like the other two SMEs I gave examples of. Yeah, sure. So the answer is they complement what they don't have with getting somebody who can complement their skills. So for example, I know entrepreneurs who are very good at spotting risk, but not as good at spotting innovations and opportunities. That their ability to get somebody who complements their skills is the key. And I found that somebody who is really optimistic, always looking for opportunities, a lot of times they miss on what could go wrong, right? But I think the key is that entrepreneurs, if they complement their abilities with, they surround themselves with their direct reports or their peers or their fellow peer entrepreneurs who can fill that void, then they succeed. And that's the key thing, because no person on earth can be sort of master in all the skills. That's a given. So it will be theoretical for me to just say, oh no, please, cultivate. Yes, you can, but beyond a point, it's a combination. You need to have some other people working with you to be able to do that. And that happens when small companies actually institutionalize project management office very clearly. Because project management office is just not about efficiency, streamline, looking at timelines and things like that. That's a more mundane stuff. The more important thing is about the constitution of the members of the PMO, which basically should complement the skills of the entrepreneurs. And that's something what we have done and which really helps the entrepreneurs.
And I think what you were talking about a little while earlier, that sometimes entrepreneurs, they refuse to accept things that they don't know, right? So basically we know and we'll do it. And this question, can I take that as an answer that you at Wadhwani identified that gap, and those are the kinds of mentors that you provide? So if the gap is that the matching mechanism? Is that your market making mechanism?
One of them, yeah. So one of the criteria is basically identifying what the persona of the entrepreneur is and how that persona can be fuller with complementing the skills that entrepreneur doesn't have. So when the advisor comes in, the role of the advisor is just not about solving a business problem. And like I said earlier, is a learning and consulting. So the role of that advisor or mentor is to ensure that the entrepreneur develops that mindset over a period of time. Because over a period of time, we don't want to be consulting with them. We want to be solving their problems on their own. And I think that happens only when you teach them how to fish, just not give them fish when they're hungry. So I think that's our role that we basically play when we do the match and when we basically look at solving the problem.
I think I have two related questions from there. I think a lot of people are keen to know how do they approach you, and one question is, what are the qualification factors for an MSME to qualify to get mentoring from you? And I think Ankur wanted to ask essentially, how do we enroll for the Wadhwani Foundation Catalyst program and get some grant funding? If you could throw some light on that.
Sure. So I think, and interestingly, Advantage and Catalyst programs go hand in hand, because grant funding Catalyst is a horizontal. They spot the opportunities within SME community to be able to figure out who is innovating or not. So the simple answer to reach out to us is very clear. Basically, obviously you can write to me on my official email ID, and I can supply that to both of you, and you can write that. But on the website, it's very clearly, if you go to Sahayata website, there is an email ID out there wherein you can, there is an application process there, and there is also an app that we have. So you can download that app and we can send you those links and you can download that app and register yourself. Once you get registered, then our team starts getting in touch with you to be able to take it forward. Of course, there is a detailed process, but in the interest of time, I'm kind of summarizing it. The criteria are very clear. We are looking for SMEs, qualitative criteria. You should be hungry, you should be aspiring, you should be ethical, you should be looking at really committing yourself to the transformation journey. So it's not just enough to be ambitious and aspirational and want to grow big. Yes, there are many like that, but we are looking for that one thing which the entrepreneurs want to really commit themselves to in the process of transformations, because the idea is, they need to be committed to spending those hours and ensuring that professionalism also happens. The second one is a more quantitative set of criteria, which is more to do with the revenue size and things like that. So what we typically look at is $1 million to $50 million. So anyway, any company which is in that range basically is a fit to us. We are geography agnostic. We have few choices in terms of industries, but given our Sahayata program mission is also to protect and create jobs, we will be industry agnostic at the first stage as well. So whichever industry you belong to, it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, you should also be right now in the stage wherein you are aspiring to grow 2x, 5x, and 10x. And so if somebody is very complacent that, okay, I think it doesn't matter, 10% growth is fine, they may not fit the bill of what we are looking at. We are looking at entrepreneurs, because the reason is India is suffering from a very long tail of smaller entrepreneurs, MSMEs. We want to make that tail shorter and change the shape. Yeah. We want to make the ecosystem of MSMEs solid by ensuring that they reach sufficient size, critical mass. And for that, aspiration to grow really big globally is very important.
So does that mean, that's a second part of Ankur's question as well, does that mean that completely newborn startups, I think he's in the social enterprise space, and newborn startups in the social enterprise space, do they qualify in any of the schemes at all, or you have to have that 1 million size to qualify?
No, so they qualify what our other bucket, which is venture fast track, which is meant for startups, okay. Right? So it's a spectrum. So either you are either you want to be an entrepreneur, or you're an early stage entrepreneur or startup, or you're an SME. Anything that you look at will fit in one of our programs for sure, right? So it's just a question of just reach out to us and we'll direct you to the right people. Absolutely fine.
So yeah, I think Sarika's already put it in the chat box, the site and the website address. Okay, and you can go to the site. From what I understand, there is an app. You can download the app, and the process starts.
Process starts. Yes.
Great. Coming down to the next question, I think a lot of MSMEs face the problem of recoveries, and the common answer that you get is, COVID situation, no, I can't pay. COVID situation, samjho, nahi pay kar sakte. How do you deal with that?
By the way, this is coming from bigger organizations. So the non-payment is actually, so there are many specific, one of them has said, even large hospitals refuse to pay us because they say it is a COVID issue.
Yeah, no, I think it's a real issue. I think there are very few, and one of the ways that we help is putting them in touch with people who are doing ecosystem financing or value chain financing, as opposed to just taking the risk on that one unit. Because here is the case when the money is locked in receivables. And I'm now setting aside the trade issue, which is public sector not paying them platform for doing that. So that I'm not talking about. I'm talking about where your customer is a private entity, not a government. And then obviously you're in the issue of receivables. So there are two ways to solve it. One is that obviously you come to us and we'll direct you to certain entities which are looking at value chain and receivables financing. And there are methods whereby you can actually have an exposure on the books of this entire value chain, whether it is receivables, whether it is factoring, whether it is any other mechanism that we deal with. And we will help you with that. That's not a problem. But more importantly, putting in a system or a tool which allows you to look at your cash run rate on a regular basis, because like I said, we don't want you to be in a debt trap. So it's not just about money, it's about how you're utilizing that money. And therefore our governance is just not connecting to the right person who might be able to help. Our governance goes much beyond that to ensure that you use that money for the right purpose and deal with it. The second dimension is about helping you guys with the legal advisors, because a lot of the receivables also have to do with what are the contracts that have been entered into. So we have tied up with JSA, which is one of the legal law firms, famous law firms in the country. We have tied up with a lot of other small curated lawyers also. Some of these problems could be solved by ensuring that you have a right engagement, like redrafting of the contract with your customer to be able to solve this. And one is a legal route, the other is a business route, and we'll be able to help you with both.
Okay. One question which comes from Devesh Gupta. Does foundation support only product ideas or is it also services?
Both. Both.
That's a good answer.
Absolutely, it's both. Because increasingly, people who are in services are productizing, and people who are in products want to have service revenue, because both have different profit pools and both have different dynamics. So the space of products and services distinction is actually going down.
Okay. I think the other question is how much of FMCG or food industry will be affected by the lockdown as a distributor or a super stockist? I think part of it was answered in Kaval's session, but we'd love to hear your answer as well.
Food is an interesting sort of industry, food and agri, because it has value chains extending from micro entrepreneurship to straight the largest enterprises, both Indian and MNCs. It's a very interesting industry. So yes, in terms of supply chain disruptions, it is quite a lot in food and agri, because you have tierization, you have a lot of sort of channels which are impacted. So there the impact is quite large. But we also believe internally in foundation that based on at least our study, they are also one of the few industries who will bounce back also faster. And the recovery period estimate that we have put ourselves, it obviously varies from different revenue buckets of the SMEs. But that's one of the industries wherein if you are it depends on whether you are a primary producer, secondary producer, or tertiary producer, whether you are branded, unbranded. So it's a nuanced answer. In the interest of time, what I will do is right now, I can tell you at a summary level that basically if you are in manufacturing and if you don't have a brand, then we expect that it's going to take at least 4 to 6 months for the recovery. If you are a branded, then it is actually harder. In fact, because for the simple reason, it's very interesting. Yeah, it's because I think the way it is panning out is for them to sustain the expenditure levels to ensure that the brand value stays in the market is harder because the money is becoming tighter. So what happens is that sustaining power goes down. So actually we will expect some brand erosion, brand value erosion in the short term, in the next 4 to 5 months. But beyond that, it will again recover. So it depends really on a lot of these factors. So it's a bit complicated, but I think that's the summary.
One of the questions I had was I think it was very fascinating when you said that you have to straddle growth and survival both at the same time. I think it was very interesting that growth itself is survival. In any of your mentoring cases, possible for you to give an example of how this actual intervention panned out? How did you straddle growth and survival strategies and growth strategies at the same time?
Sure. So there is an SME that we are dealing with, auto components manufacturer. I'll just give an example so it's much easier.
Yeah.
So they basically were in the castings, and castings is very price sensitive business, basically polymers, castings, rubber, these plastics, etc. And one of the interesting things that we did for them was to really look at how they can, although they were small, how they can look at opportunities even in Europe and elsewhere, because there are small design houses which are available at a much lower price. And for normally when you're in trouble, you wouldn't think about this because M&A and things like this also come to you when you have certain monetary power to be able to make those acquisitions. But I think we saw that opportunity. We connected with the guys out there. We have an operation in Mexico. Mexico is also in automotive. We saw that opportunity there. Through that, they were able to connect with the OE faster. So that growth engine itself became a survival strategy. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can always do damage control, negotiate with the banks, negotiate. All that will happen on one hand, but really looking at utilizing what you have and inside out, what's the best that you can do with what you have is the key. So I think that's where we suddenly hit upon this idea, and it worked because that design house had fantastic relationship with the OEs. They were able to, and they were obviously facing problems in cash. It happened, and then they're doing well. They're doing better.
So offense is the best defense. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Well, if you want to put it that way, yes, perhaps yes. In this case, yes.
Oh.
So there's one more, and I don't know how easy or difficult, but I think it should be easy for you. Someone wants to know if, for MSME coaching, what kind of OD coaches should you have? You do that so often, but what should they look for? I think it's a very broad question because each one needs a very different kind of a coach. But is there a shorter answer that you can?
Well, the shortest answer that I can think of in the interest of time right now is really, I think coaching, when it comes to coaching, is the blend of personal advice and contextual advice to the organization, right? Which is a little different from mentorship, right? And good coach, I think and when I was learning this at NCR, one of the things is who asks for the coach is very important. The one who is to be coached, or somebody else who is telling that guy that you need to hire a coach. And I think what is fundamentally, the research suggests that the person who needs to be coached has to have a very clear contract with the coach. And the coach that agrees with that contract is the right coach. It's not about really a specific type of a coach or specific backgrounds. Yes, of course, those criteria, and that's a standard analysis that one should do. What is your need of coaching? Which area you want to be coached on? Of course. But more importantly, who is in most alignment with what do you want from this end point of this coaching? So defining those impacts and defining those outcomes and put that in the contract and aligning that with that right coach is very, very important. So one who is in complete alignment, ceteris paribus, is the right coach. That's a summary. I mean, obviously that's a summary answer, but that's how one should think about it.
I think you have an interesting one, which is, I think the flavor of all the newspapers today is China. So the quit China opportunity, what is it throwing in terms of entrepreneurs? Quit China, and how does one find such opportunities? The whole Make in India program, Invest India, we heard a lot from Deepak as well. But we'd love to hear your perspectives as to how much big an opportunity is a quit China opportunity, and how does one find these opportunities?
Yes, again, this answer varies from industry to industry, obviously. But very quickly, I think it's right now what is going on is that if you recall, and I remember one study when one of the SMEs that approached us in March when the COVID hit us and everybody was talking about COVID, and China had started recovering from COVID and because of their December, Jan and all that, right? And they at that point they were automotive components, and a lot of demand flowed into them, right? Because for the time being, that China thing was kind of under trouble. So they felt fantastic because there's a great opportunity, and they need to create capacity because so they couldn't handle that demand. But I'm not naming that manufacturer and that OE, but I think the key thing was when they looked at that situation, they realized that their OEs were looking at a very short-term arrangement with them to ensure that the demand is kind of fulfilled and their supply requirements are kind of fulfilled. But they were pretty sure that China is going to recover fast, and that's exactly what happened. In most of the industries today, China is already back on recovery. China is already back to capacity utilization levels in the normal sort of trend line that you would see. Many of them are looking at 60%, 70%, 80%, which is not different from normal, right? So I think if you look at asking this question now, what is it that we need to do with China? It's pretty much the same that before COVID, whatever that standard question was, because it's pretty much now Chinese are either tough competitors to us, and they basically have, because of the capacity, scale, and size, it's tough to compete with them on prices. Therefore, it's not contextual to COVID. It's more to do with, because China is back to the recovery rates. Now the question is more to do with how you can ally with them, because Chinese have also realized that because their trade relations with the US are under trouble, their other political relations with the other countries are mixed. And if you look at the balance of power in terms of the finances, like Hong Kong has one center, Singapore has one center, and there is a significant Chinese investment and interest in both these financial sort of centers, in addition to London and New York and so on and so forth. One has to consider these equations also very, very clearly, because a lot of the decision making that is happening in China is driven by that, not only by business considerations of demand, supply, and matching that. So right now, basically, you have to think of China as like how you thought about China before COVID.
I think the question that the direction of the question is India, and I think our entire the Indian sentiment of quitting China and moving some opportunities back to India. Yeah. So the whole quit China movement from India's perspective, Prime Minister, we are dumping their apps. We are basically saying, okay, their imports from China are being stalled. So what opportunities are being opened up within India from this whole quit China movement, which is a very India sentiment, not less of a global question, more of, I would say, India specific, if I understand the direction of the question.
Okay. So I think the whole idea about banning that right now, our read is more cosmetic than actual. It will go back to early stages after some point of time, is what we expect to happen. So therefore, the quit China movement, don't read it as a trend that is going to continue. Don't read it as a, so if you devise your strategies based on what is happening right now in quit China, you might go wrong. So my only advice would be, actually quit China movement is very short term. It's not long term. The way we read the situation, of course. So therefore, if you look at the specific things which are India centric right now, you should think about it as again a standard question of the Chinese are here to stay. Their apps will be here to stay. Their technology intervention in our software and other things are also going to stay. I don't think you can assume a scenario that it is going to go away, and that's the only way. You have to assume it and fight it. There is no other option for that. So I'm tossing this question. There is no quit China that you should expect going forward. So there is no answer to how to deal with quit China. There is no quit China.
I think Samir, we are coming very close to the end of this session, and thank you very much for telling us and talking about your views. If I had to take 3 or 4 pieces, I will always remember, can't have brittle bones. I will always remember, make sure that your trauma center is really strong, and also make sure that people who come inside trauma center, you give them the courage and strength to do it. And I think some of the inputs that you have given us in terms of both Sahayata as well as Advantage, very, very, very useful. And a lot of our viewers will, I'm sure they will reach out to us. And so on behalf of them, thank you very much for spending this hour with us. And to our viewers, the practice of summarization of key messages, we have moved it into a blog. So you will see us send out this blog either tomorrow sometime in the evening or day after tomorrow in the morning. Obviously, the recording of this interview is there on our website. So, and before we close, we will love to have a quick feedback on the session. So, Shweta, you think we can do a quick, let's see what the feedback says. Can you quickly rate this? We give you 30 seconds. That's a resounding thumbs up. About 92-93% of the people say top class. So thank you very, very much, Samir, for being with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate Sangram and Alok for having invited me here. It was interesting because these subjects are so deep and wide, but very nice. I think thank you, and thank you audience for patiently listening to me. I hope it was okay.
It was very good. We're seeing it on.
No, I think it was fantastic. I think a lot of lessons were very, very relevant. I think what stayed with me is offense is the best defense. And go for growth. Growth is the only survival. I'm going to stay with those two lines. And of course, we'll summarize it in our blog as well, which will go up on Monday. So thank you very much from Alok, me, and Samir to the lovely audience that have spent a Saturday evening with us. And we hope to see you again. We will be present every Saturday between 6 and 7. Next week, we have Sanjay Mehta, and we shall dig into the nitty-gritty of digital marketing and how can brands go digital first, with a lot of details of how digital strategies can be planned. On that note, a very warm goodbye from all of us. Have a great weekend and see you next week.
So that's it from our side, from Guts, Glory and Story. Thank you very much. Great weekend. And thank you once again to Samir Sathe and all our viewers.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye.
Bye.